my camera like this? Will it be better?
Yeah, I think so. This is better.
Yes,
Uh,
yes.
is
Looks
this
better.
better?
Yes. So we are
Okay.
live. So you can start, Simran.
Okay. So, good afternoon to all of you joining us today. I am Simran, and on behalf of the Jammu and Kashmir Policy Institute, I am delighted to welcome you to today's session in our Expert Talk series. The Expert Talk series is JKPI's unique initiative where we source inputs and recommendations from experts in various fields on sustainable development goals through one on one dialogues. Every week, we host experts drawing from their rich repertoire of experiences in the field. We believe that personal stories depict their passion and their passionate pursuit of their goals. Research on address gaps and efforts to be part of the change, and these are all significant aspects of development in action at an individual level. In this phase of series on SDG 13, that is climate action, we aim to gather insights from experts to effectively address the pressing challenges posed by climate change. Therefore, we are privileged to have amongst us an exceptional guest who has devoted her career to spotlighting environmental and climate changes in rural India. It is my honor to introduce Ms. Nidhi Jamwal, a Mumbai based journalist with over 2 decades of experience reporting on the environment, climate change, and rural issues. Ms. Jamwal's journey has taken her from the quiet hill town of Riasi in Jammu to the bustling editorial rooms of Down to Earth and Gaon Connection. She has covered everything from community driven climate solutions to the gender dimensions of environmental challenges. Her accolades are numerous, including but not limited to the UNFPA at 50 Special Award for her pioneering work on feminizing climate solutions. Ms. Jamwal, thank you so much for being here with us today. Now, let's dive right into the conversation.
Yeah.
So, you grew up in the beautiful hill town of Riasi. How did your upbringing there shape your passion for environmental journalism, especially from a rural perspective?
Thank you so much, Simran. First of all, I really want to thank JKPI for inviting me for this lecture series. Like you've mentioned, I belong to Jammu Kashmir and I grew up there, which is why I have some special affinity for everything that comes from J&K. So I'm really happy to be speaking with JKPI today and sharing my experiences of being an environment journalist. So about my growing up, I actually grew up in a small hill town called Jyotipuram of Riasi district. It is like 10 kilometers further up of Riasi district. And now when I look back, I think my understanding of environment and why environment is important uh, came because I grew up in a town where, we were surrounded by hills, and that time our hills all had good forests in them. Chenab river used to actually flow down, and every morning evening used to see it flowing there, and our sky used to be blue. Now everybody's talking of Delhi's pollution and how it's all gray skies. I remember all the years that we were there, we had a blue sky. We didn't even know what it was like to have pollution. I remember, in one of our chemistry practicals, because CBSE had the same experiments all over the country for all schools. So there was one experiment in which you had to mix some chemicals in a test tube and then you take it out in the air, and if the chemical color changes to certain color, it shows the level of pollution in your immediate ambient environment. And I remember we students doing that experiment and mixing those chemicals. And then we were running around outside a school because the color did not change, because there was zero pollution. And, we actually were standing on the road and waiting. Some Jeep, if it passes by, we will run after the tailpipe and figure out does the color changes also or not. So imagine that's the kind of clean environment we grew up in. And because we were in a small town, I remember with my mom, we used to grow vegetables. So all our food most of it was organically grown. But I think at that time, we didn't understand that this means environment conservation. For us, it was a way of life. It's only after I moved to Delhi for my college is when I realized what cities are and what pollution actually means. I moved to Delhi in mid 1990s when it was still not as bad as it is right now. But even then, we had buses, we had high level of pollution. I remember when I used to return from college home, there used to be a layer of dust on our clothes. A lot of us know we had that Kashmiri carpet, that white color carpet, which is all embroidered. I remember having that at our home. And within some 3 months of living in Delhi, it had actually turned brown. And we had to actually pack it and keep it inside. And we realized that, this kind of Kashmiri carpet is not meant to be put in Delhi. So that's how I think living in a hill town in J&K actually made environment so much a part of our life that only when I stepped out of that environment, I realized how important all that is.
Thank you so much for sharing that. The contrast that you have mentioned, of your experiences in your childhood and after you moved to a new city, they're jarring actually.
Absolutely.
But it's inspiring to see that how you took that contrast and used it to bring about a positive transformation.
No, I think
So,
also another small incident that comes to my mind is I remember everybody's right now talking about how Yamuna has this foam, that toxic foam is there. And again, in I think late 90s only, one of my friends had college in Noida and Delhi used to travel across Yamuna and go. One day he came and he was screaming that, I saw icebergs on Yamuna. This is late 90s. So this is also urban, because a person who's lived always in Delhi doesn't really understand anything else. And I got completely shocked. I said, it can't be icebergs. And he said, no, no, I saw nice icebergs floating on Yamuna. And then all of us friends, we went there and we stood on that Yamuna bridge. And I was like, guys, this is toxic foam. This is not icebergs. So, and also I think it's a sad thing that so many years later, the pollution has only grown. It hasn't
hmm.
gone down. It's become so much worse now. Yeah, Simran, sorry, just came to my mind and
No,
asked.
no, no, please. This is your space. You're the expert, and we are here to hear from you. Thank you so much for sharing that. Also, we noted that you call yourself an accidental environmental journalist. Can you share the story of how you stumbled into this field, like you're beginning into this journey? Like you've shared the experiences that inspired you, but when was it that you felt that, okay, now I have to take this action and this is it. This is my purpose and I'm going to work in this field.
So I think it is the air pollution in Delhi, which kind of uh, uh, triggered me to start
Hmm.
looking at environment stories from a very different perspective. During our college, during master's program, I remember there's an institution called Center for Science and Environment, CSE, in Delhi, and that's the time they are the first ones who started talking about air pollution in Delhi. And as college students, because we used to travel by DTC buses and red line buses at that time, and we used
Hmm.
to face pollution a lot. At the time, CSE used to actually hold a lot of public meetings, just to kind of make people aware about these issues. Because till that time, air pollution, nobody talked about air pollution in the country, and things like talking about suspended particulate matter and PM 2.5, PM 10. These were very very new things to us. And from college, I remember we used to go for these public meetings just to find out what is there. Uh,
Hmm.
we were shown a lot of films about what air pollution means, what it does to human body, what it does to unborn children. There were images of, I remember, a Delhi lung and a lung from a person in Himachal. Delhi lung was all black, and you had this Himachal lung which was pink. So all those things, I think, started to somewhere make me look at environment from a very very different perspective, and realize why it is important for us to now start talking of environment journalism. Even that time, I wouldn't say that I wanted to get into environmental journalism. It is just that I joined CSC at that time. more so as a researcher. They used to bring out these books called State of India's Environment Report. So my work was more towards research work around environment and all. And because CSE brings out a magazine called Down to Earth. It's a fortnightly magazine, very, very famous, very reputed. I just happened to write a couple of articles for Down to Earth while I was still with CSE. And that's when some people, my peers in Down to Earth told me that, you can be a good reporter. Why don't you try and do reporting for Down to Earth? And at that time, of course, I never wanted to be a journalist. And, I just told them, no, 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 I don't like journalism and all that. I don't like journalists. So I don't want to get into this. I'll just write only a couple of stories once in a while. But because Down to Earth gave me an opportunity to travel, mostly travel to hinterlands, to capture stories around environment, I think that's something which made me realize that I enjoy traveling to hinterlands, to villages, to rural areas, and documenting those stories. Also, maybe because I grew up in such a small town, about which, when I moved to Delhi in college, and people used to ask me, where did you grow up? I could not even name that town, Jyotipuram, because it just didn't exist. So nobody knew of it, how it was to live there, what were the challenges people faced there. Nobody in the so-called mainstream media or world really bothered about it. So I think once Down to Earth gave me an opportunity to go back to traveling to these small towns, back of beyond places, to understand issues from there, that really got me exciting, because you're also trying to learn a lot of things about your own country. I think very few people get that opportunity where you can actually travel, and we live in such a vast country. You have, a long coastal line, you have the Himalayas, you have deserts, you have so many different ecologies within a country. So I think it gave me a very good opportunity to understand my country, to understand people, to meet people, talk to them, listen to their stories. And I think that's how I just thought that this is what excites me and this is what I would really want to do.
Thank you for sharing that. Again, it's incredible that not only were you moved by something, but you also chose to actively do something about it. So that's inspiring. Your work often integrates a gender perspective on climate issues. So, what does this lens reveal about the challenges and solutions in this field that otherwise go unnoticed?
So, I often, when I speak to people, and even when I think about environment and who is the first environmentalist in my life, I always think of my mother. And you know what I will say right now, I guess most of you and most of the people who are watching it would agree that our mothers were the first environmentalists that we came across, but we never looked at them as an environmentalist. Why I'm saying that? We grew up in homes where wastage of food was not allowed. I knew we were not allowed to leave even a single grain of rice on our plates. We had to finish whatever food we took. Recycling of clothes. I would wear my elder sister's clothes. So very normal. We would recycle books, textbooks, everything you used to be done. Nothing used to really go waste. Even if there was some old sheet, it would be converted into something else and all. So I think that's how women, especially in our part of the world, have always been respecting environment. If you see the Chipko movement also came from rural women, of Rainy Village. Why they so-called started hugging trees, which everybody keeps talking about, is because they know the importance of those trees for their survival. So women have always been closely linked to environment and environmental protection. Having said that, once I started traveling to rural India, the image of rural India, which is projected mostly, is these illiterate women, unlettered women, who don't understand much. So you really don't even consider their viewpoint. Once I started traveling to rural India, and because I am a woman, I could have easy access to most rural women, and they would open up and speak about almost everything under the sun. I started realizing that even for smallest of issues, I'll tell you, I once was visiting a village in Bihar. It was a Musahar village. Musahar is one of the lowest caste in the whole hierarchy and highly marginalized community. So when I reached that village was surrounded by water on all sides, and all the rural women were like waist deep in that water around the village. So I got completely intrigued that, with their saris and everything, why are all these women standing in this, which look like dirty, muddy water, waist deep in water, and in between, they all kept putting their hand down and picking something out. And that's when I realized that there's something called ghonga. It's like a snail, which actually they catch, and that's what is fed to the families. And for them, the importance of that water body is that it provides nutrition, protein. They don't understand it is protein, but that's what it is to their children. Then I also visited some other villages where I realized that a lot of women have together set up biogas plants in their villages because they were so affected by firewood and indoor air pollution that they realized that biogas is such a better way of being in their kitchen so that their eyes don't water and their lungs don't get filled with these toxic air. So there are a lot of such instances which made me realize that we need to look at environment stories from a gender lens, and we also have to feminize these stories, because the way a woman would look at a story, environment story, is very different of how men would look at it. Because eventually a lot of work, whether it is around water, feeding the family, a lot of men migrate, then taking care of your farms, taking care of your harvest and all comes on women. So which is why for women, protecting the environment becomes supreme, because they have to feed their families, because they have to take care of their children. So for them, environmentalism is not how you and me see it as, I call it very elite environmentalism is also there. That, we're rich people and all, we want our trees look nice. I want those trees. But for them, the value of environment is more in their everyday lives, in their survival, which is why it's important. You see, you go to tribal areas, there is a reason they have been protecting those forests and water bodies, because their survival, their livelihoods depend on all those natural resources. So I think looking at environment story from a gender lens actually adds so many new layers to a story. And when I was working with Gaon Connection, we had a lot of community journalists that we used to work with. These community journalists are mainly rural reporters, and initially they were very hesitant of speaking with rural women, and they said महिलाएं बात नहीं करती हैं, वो शर्माती हैं, और वो उस तरह की बातें कहते थे. But then we made it a rule that if we are doing a story, it has to have a woman voice. We will not publish a story if there are no women voices in it. Initially, it was difficult, but later on, we figured that how everybody realized the importance of bringing in those voices in your stories. And now, so many times they tell me that, "Ma'am, जब तक हम किसी महिला से बात नहीं करते, हमें लगता है हमारी story incomplete है." So that's how they have also realized that when you speak to women, they will tell you such practical things around a story, whether it is a solution or a problem, that you will really realize it enriches your story also.
Thank you. That's really, really insightful. Um, a little bird told me that you trekked to the Everest base camp as part of a boot camp to report on climate change there. So, that sounds like a transformative experience. And we're curious to know what were your biggest takeaways on climate change when you worked on such an iconic yet vulnerable location?
Yeah, so in May this year, I happened to go to Everest Base Camp. Basically, there is Nepal Forum of Science Journalists.
Hmm.
They had organized a Himalayan climate boot camp where they take, a group of journalists from SAARC countries to the Everest region, so to document stories around climate change. Everest we all know as a place where people go to, climb, to summit and all. But let's look at it from the other aspect, that what climate change is doing to that region. So I happened to apply for that climate change boot camp, and my application got selected. And we were two of us from India who went there, and one of them, a dear friend of mine, Athar Parvez, he's from Kashmir only. So he was there and I was there. And there were some other journalists from Nepal, Bangladesh, and Bhutan. So I think that trip to Everest Base Camp has been actually a transformative experience, both professionally and personally, I would say. Professionally, around climate change, uh, because I've been traveling to different parts of the country to report on climate change, but the kind of region we are looking at, Everest region, and at that elevation, which is also so cut off,
Hmm.
from the rest of the world, so to say, uh, trying to understand what climate change is doing to that region was actually very scary and also very shocking. Because the kind of climate region is basically where the indigenous Sherpa community lives. And these Sherpa communities, some hundreds of years back, when they moved from China, they all came all the way to parts of Everest region in Nepal, and they settled over there. And they've remained cut off from the outside world for a very, very long period, till Everest, we all know of Tenzing and Hillary summited Everest, and the whole region opened, and now you have people from climbers from all over the world coming to that region every year to summit the peak. Now if you go to that region, we met a lot of Sherpa people who actually said that they are finding mosquitoes in that region. So, even if you see a lot of areas in Kashmir, which are colder region, would not have mosquitoes. There was a time Shimla in India did not have mosquitoes. But as temperatures are rising, we have mosquitoes being found in all these higher elevation regions. And why there is a problem with mosquitoes? Because we all know how vector-borne diseases, whether it is malaria, dengue, chikungunya, all these are rising rapidly, and they are also becoming one of the reasons for so many deaths every year. So going to a region which is so fragile, like an Everest region, and there if you have Sherpa community which is finding mosquitoes also in that region. Now imagine if you start having the kind of dengue outbreaks you have in Delhi or in any other parts of the country where so many lives are lost. And in a region like Everest region, health facilities are also bare minimal. So you don't have the kind of primary health centers and hospitals which are there in other areas that we see. So when you have these challenges of vectors being found in a region like this, and they make it their home, and if in future you start having diseases, vector-borne diseases being reported in that area, how are you going to take care of the health challenges in that region? That's like a very, very scary situation around climate change. Second major issue which I found, and which most of us who went there found, was that last year, if you realize that in winters, we did not have snowfall. I mean, I also did stories around how in Kashmir, Chilai Kalan was dry. There was no snowfall during Chilai Kalan period, and how, slopes of Gulmarg had no snow at all. And it badly affected the tourism also in Kashmir region, because tourists come there because of the snow. Now, imagine going to the Everest region, and we met some glaciologists also who had come there. This is, I'm talking of 5,050 meters there is a lab called Lobuche is a climate lab in just before Everest Base Camp, and there were some glaciologists who had come there, and she told us that she's been monitoring glaciers in that region for the past few decades, and how over a period of time the glaciers in that region are not getting the kind of snow they need to replenish themselves. So they are losing snow at a much faster pace as compared to gaining snow through snowfall. So even that region, you have snowfall declining. Everest region is where you have glaciers. We all know the Himalayan region is known as the third pole because it is the maximum store of fresh water, the third pole, that's why it's called. It has fresh water, it supports the Indian subcontinent region. So if you have less snowfall, if you have glaciers in that area receding at a much faster pace, it is going to be a huge water security issue in the coming decades. So that's like a huge, I think, challenge for all of us. And we all need to really start looking at some ways of addressing it, because in future, it's all going to become a huge, huge issue, the water security.
Thank you for sharing that. It actually connects to the next question that I intend to ask you. But before that, I would like to quickly address our viewers and audience that if there's something in this conversation that piques your interest, or if you have any questions for Mr. Jamwal, please add them in the chat and we'll try to bring them into the conversation. You have over 2 decades of experience working in this field. So, what have you observed to be the most pressing concerns, especially in rural India in particular, and what solutions would you propose to solve this problem?
So, I mean, before I go there, Simran, another thing around, I think, EPC Everest Base Camp, which I think I must share, is one of the stories that I did from that region is how actually climate change is impacting yak breeding. So, we don't even realize how important temperature thresholds are. So once we went there, a lot of people said that yak breeding season has changed in our region. And usually the breeding used to happen in July, August, but it doesn't happen now. It's got pushed to September, October, and all of that. Initially, I thought that nowadays everybody connects everything to climate change. That this is not happening, climate change. But as we started interacting more and more with people, and also speaking to subject experts, we realize that how yaks also need a certain temperature threshold to be able to reproduce. So if your temperature thresholds are getting affected, they come under heat stress. So the milk production gets affected, but it is also affecting their breeding, because when you have changing rainfall patterns, it directly impacts the pasture lands in that region. Now, yak depends on the fresh grasses which grow there. Now, what's happening is over a period of time, because you have temperatures rising, you have rainfall changing, rainfall's declining. So the pasture lands there are getting degraded. So there is a lack of excess of nutrition to yaks, which actually directly affects their breeding. So again, how important climate change and even 1 or 2 degrees temperature change in a region affects so many things. So I just thought bring that point in. A lot of times we say 1-2 degrees se kya farak padta hai, but it really affects a lot of species. And these species are important, may not be important for me in Mumbai, but yak is the backbone of economy of upper Himalayan region, even in India. It's not just in Everest region. If you go to higher elevation Himalayan regions, yaks form the backbone economy. If they start declining, it is going to affect population that lives in that region and that depends on yak for its survival. Having said that, now in 20 years, the challenge is, if I look at rural India, 2/3 of Indian population still lives in rural India, right? So that's the kind of people we are looking at. If you go to rural India, I'm not saying rural India has not progressed. Rural India has definitely progressed. There are a lot of changes, positive changes that have happened as compared to what the situation was possibly maybe in 70s or 80s and all. We have a good network of roads also. We have better schools also. But the whole problem, the biggest challenge that I see right now is that in rural India, you still have a large chunk of population which is vulnerable, which is marginalized, which is poor. They do not still have access to enough nutrition, sufficient water, or better sources of livelihood. In such a scenario, when you have climate change happening, which is actually affecting almost everything that we do, what we eat, how we work, will our children get enough education? Everything is now getting defined by this thing called climate change. So when we have a large chunk of population in rural India, which still doesn't have access to the basic facilities at the level that we want, we have so many districts in India where the groundwater still has high contamination of arsenic, of fluoride, of high iron. So in that scenario, when you have climate change happening, when you have rainfall patterns changing, when you have groundwater not replenishing properly, it is a huge threat to a large chunk of population which is already underserved, right? And like right now we have COP29 going on in Baku. And when I started as an environment journalist, we always used to look at it from equity point of view. We used to say you have north and you have south, the world, the global north and the global south. And we always said that global south, you have to look at climate change and emissions from an equity perspective. By equity, I mean that, of course, we all understand that all the industrialized countries have already done more than their share of emissions, which is why your planet is hotting up so fast. Countries like India and all, which are developing economies, need that equitable space to grow. So you cannot compare my emissions in India with emissions of, say, US or Europe. So you cannot tell me to cut down my emissions because I have a large population base. Now, if you see the same equity principle also comes to our own country, where you will have haves and have-nots. So, and when climate change happens, we are realizing the maximum impact of climate change is happening on the marginalized and vulnerable communities. When we talk of sea level rise happening around our some 7,500 kilometers coastline, we have fishing villages all along our coastline. So when sea level rises, it affects the fishing communities the most, and they are already poor, marginalized, and vulnerable, especially the small and marginal fishers. When we talk of marine heat waves, which are now rising, marine heat waves also affect aquatic species. Again, you have vulnerable communities like fishers who depend on seas for their livelihood, and marine heat waves directly affects them. Again, the example, like if you have sea surface temperatures rising, we have more cyclones happening, and we have Arabian Sea and we have Bay of Bengal on both the sides of the country. So when cyclones happen, a lot of, if you speak to a lot of small and marginal fishers who actually use their own artisanal boats to do fishing, they all say that in a year, they are wasting a lot more extra days when they cannot go for fishing because you have more cyclones forming in our, in the bay and also the Arabian Sea. So I think the biggest challenge I see is that we still have a huge population which is underserved, which is marginalized, which is vulnerable, and climate change is further affecting them and making it more difficult to access even the basic resources. So that to me is the biggest challenge, and I don't think we are really paying enough attention towards it. And the reason I say that also is in last month in October, I was in Bihar where massive floods happened. And Bihar, as we all know, in North Bihar, you have one of the most poorest people of the country live in North Bihar region, which is also the most flood-prone region of the country. While I was in Bihar, some 17 or 18 districts of Bihar were completely underwater. Millions of people were displaced. Same time, Bangalore also had heavy rainfall for 1 or 2 days, and Bangalore was flooded. And it is no surprise that everyone in the country, media, everybody was talking of how Bangalore is underwater, but nobody
Mm.
really bothered what's happening to the poor people in Bihar who have been displaced and who get displaced every year. So I
Mm.
think those are the kind of stories which become very, very important for us to document and narrate, because climate change is making our world more and more inequitable.
Mm. Great. So, based on what you've seen, what solutions would you propose, both in general at the community level and also small actions that we can take as individuals?
Right. So, Simran, I mean, being a journalist, to be very honest, I don't call myself a domain expert or anything like
Mm.
that. So, I'm very wary of offering solutions, to be very
Mm.
honest. I would leave it
Mm.
to the domain experts to say what are the solutions which would work or not work. But two, three things which I think as a journalist, how I see it. One is that because I said climate change is making our world more and more inequitable, communities which already lack a voice, where media spotlight never reaches, it is our duty, it becomes our important role to specifically document those voices, those stories. Otherwise, they will remain unheard. Otherwise, climate change will make situation worse for the communities which are already marginalized, and nobody will even look at finding solutions specific to those communities to address the challenges posed by climate change. So I think first thing which as journalists, especially environment journalists, need to do is to document and record these voices, especially in this inequitable world. Second thing I strongly believe is we need to talk, write, document a lot of about our traditional knowledge, our ancient wisdom. The more and more that I have traveled to rural India, I've realized that, in India, we have a very, very rich heritage around environmental conservation. Very, very interesting traditional practices which we have been using for centuries. If you go to the deserts of Rajasthan, where temperature even touches 51, 52 degrees Celsius, you still have villages which where people live. They inhabit those regions. The reason is that, and they have very, very, barely few millimeters of rainfall in the entire year.
Mm.
But because of their traditional knowledge of harvesting water, they've been
Mm.
able to survive in those regions by capturing every drop of rainfall that falls on their region, whether it is having, they have tanka system, they have kundi
Mm.
system. These are very, very local specific solutions which local communities had developed over centuries because they knew how to live in that region, and they have acclimatized, so to say, from that region. So I remember a couple of stories we had done from Kashmir region, some reporters had done, of how Kashmiri farmers have actually a way of storing potatoes. They dig that area and then they store the potatoes in them and then they cover it. And that's how they actually keep the potatoes fresh over a season. So you really don't need air conditioned storage houses. These are all traditional systems they have developed. I still remember there was some village called Doodh Koti or something like that. It's again in
Mm.
Kashmir region where the entire village is known for its milk production and milk and allied thing. Now they don't have refrigerators there. So how they use the local water bodies, and they have created these small tooth potties where they keep their milk, and the milk stays okay for 2 to 3 days. So again, you don't need electricity, you don't need refrigeration to keep these things, safe and to be able to protect your harvest. So I think these are very, very important small examples of traditional
Hmm.
wisdom, which we have to take note of. Of course, we have to look at science. Being a science journalist, I look at science and I do science stories, but it's important for us to bring science
Hmm.
and our traditional wisdom together if we want to
Hmm.
actually face the challenges which climate change poses for all of us.
Thank you for sharing these meaningful actions, and also bringing to light certain traditional practices that we can all do to contribute to climate change in our daily lives. My final question for you is that what advice would you give to aspiring and young journalists who want to make an impact in environmental reporting?
I never look at, unfortunately, things from immediate impact
Hmm.
perspective. See, what has happened now with media and with all of us is that impact has become so important, and everybody wants an immediate impact. If somebody is giving a funding to somebody, oh, show me the impact in 1 year. And then you say, oh, so many lives changed, 500 million lives changed, and all of that. My advice or my message to environment journalists would be that environmental journalism is a very, very slow process. It's a very,
Hmm.
very slow process. So you need to have a lot of patience. You need to
Hmm.
have a lot of diligence. Like there are so many times, I've been doing environment journalism for 25 years. And trust me, in 25 years, environment has only gotten worse in the country. When I started off, things were not this bad. Our forests were not in such a bad state. Our species were not so much more threatened. Our water bodies were still less polluted. So now things have only gone worse. And so many times I ask my own self that
Hmm.
what have I done? What is the point of traveling, going to hinterlands and doing stories when things are not getting better? And there are moments you feel very disillusioned, but I think environmental journalism is not going to give us quick results. This is something you will have to keep doing over and over again, even if we don't see immediate solution, immediate impact. But our whole idea would be that maybe if I spend another 10, 20 years
Hmm.
documenting these stories, telling government what's happening in back of beyond villages, how people are surviving or not surviving, what's happening to the forests in tribal areas, I'm hoping that maybe
Hmm.
next generation of children will be able to breathe better and live in a
Hmm.
more healthier environment. So you have to allow yourself that much space. Otherwise, it gets depressing, it gets too disillusioning. So you have to just be patient. You have to tell yourself, like, a lot of times I say that, we environment journalists are like historians, so to say. I don't want to angry any of the historians who are there, but our job is to document what's
Hmm.
happening to our environment every day. So I
Hmm.
take that as my job and I want to do it to the best of my abilities. I want that the voice of communities, which are so-called voiceless, where mainstream media rarely reaches, to record those voices and put it on public platform and help it reach the government, so that can we shape policies around that. So that's what I see my role as, and I hope that hopefully in the next 10, 20 years, or when the next generation comes of kids, they will live in a cleaner India. I hope so.
Uh, I think you're making an incredible contribution. And I also love how you've stressed upon the fact that we all need to come together and take these measures, not just individually, but also collectively on a large scale in a sustained manner for there to be, positive result. Thank you so much for this enlightening conversation. Uh, through your story, we could saw how perseverant you have been. You have deep passion for this work, and you've done a great deal in addressing this critical issue. To our audience, I want to say thank you so much for being an engaged part of this dialogue. And we hope that everything that we learned today, we will carry it forward and practice it in our lives to create a more sustainable future. Thank you so much for joining.
Thank you so much, Simran. Thanks to JKPI. Best wishes. Okay.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Bye.
Bye.